you had to live through this, massive transformation to that's all described in the book, and you had to do a lot of work on yourself, and you documented all of that. What I'm wondering is, though, when you went back to write it all up, were there things that came to light that you didn't realize at the time?
Well, yeah, I think I officially sat down with a laptop with a little program that would keep all my words and thoughts in October of 2017. And while I had probably, geez, had a spiritual turn back in 2005 and a coming to grips with my inability to drink like a normal person, which they call alcoholism. I really started growing in a different direction in 2005, but I didn't decide I had something to share that was worthy until 2017. And then to answer your question more directly, a couple of important things happened shortly thereafter. I'd been writing for maybe a year, and the band decided we would get back together for the first time in 10 years to tour. So suddenly I had, instead of interaction a couple times a year for charity gigs with the band here in South Carolina, we were having meetings and rehearsals and planning our biggest interaction with fans in the country in a decade. So all that exposure to my buddies, and while all of our lives had changed, it caused me to think back to how it used to be, and had we changed at all, the way we interacted with one another. And so then we do the tour, and I continue writing. I've told no one at the time that I'm writing with the hopes to make it a book,
Mm.
but it still helps me stay single purposed, driven to creating a manuscript that's meaningful on several levels. And the tour finishes. I'm feeling high as a kite on life. Oh my gosh, that was so great. And we go back to normal life here, and I continue writing, but now with a new perspective and sort of a new energy towards, gosh, there's so much more to write about, I think, now. And so I kept writing, and I did. It took me almost 4 years to get this in a state that a publisher was proud to publish. And so
Mm.
a lot, yeah, I divided a lot of time, but then getting back with my bandmates certainly caused a change in scenery in my mind. I realized, oh wait, now I have perspective. It would have been a greatly different book if it was written in 2015, because in 2015 I didn't know if the band would ever tour again. We hadn't
Mm.
really planned. We didn't know. We were sort of waiting to see if the timing would ever become right. And I'm glad it made for a concise end to my book, if you will. I could end
Yeah.
it after that tour before COVID started. I don't know if you remember COVID. It was this little thing that bothered the entire world and killed lots of people.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Well, I
so
mean,
yeah,
and then the other aspect of it that I'm curious about, because it's quite the roller coaster, um, even just for someone reading this, let alone someone that went through it. Um, and so when you wrote this, you had to relive a lot of these moments, some fantastic, some really awful. But not only did you, in theory, ostensibly, your family, friends, and bandmates were going to kind of relive this as you delve back into it, and with the publishing of it. How did you handle that?
yeah, I tell you, writing something down about your life, knowing that you want to share it with whoever wants to open the pages of the book, is way different than talking about it with friends or family or a loved one. Or uh, it just is. You realize the permanence when you see it written there, and it just makes you question how you speak, how you want to communicate. And I had some good guiding forces. I'm so thankful that uh, yeah, that my life was a roller coaster, no doubt. And I wanted to let people know that it was, but also I didn't want to harm people. There was part of me that said, "Tell them everything. It'll be amazing." Because I'd read a lot of music bios that were anywhere from illuminating to grotesque to
Yeah.
hurtful. And I didn't want to be that guy. I still had kids that were teenagers, and I had an ex-wife. I had bandmates that were still my bandmates. There's no need to go harm people with your words for some form of self-satisfaction
Yeah.
or to sell books.
Mhm.
So I was very careful what to write. And yeah, living through things like uh, the beginnings of the band, glorious, wonderful. I couldn't wait. I'd been reliving it all the time, honestly, for
Mhm.
years. People always want to know, how did you guys get together? But actually putting it down on, in paragraphs, I wanted to make sure I got it right too, from my perspective. So I was diligent about dates and using old calendars, personal calendars from my life that documented a lot of our early days. And
Mhm.
again, I didn't want to hurt anybody, but um, yeah, just amazing to sit down and read it back, going through my mom being alive and then passing, and that was a difficult part of the book that you've read. That was hard. That was probably the hardest
Mhm.
part, really facing some things in grieving, because grieving is kind of forever. Even
Yeah.
if you pass through maybe the worst of it, and you've moved from losing someone to remembering someone, it was still hard. And it still is, even if I go back and read portions of my book for groups. Oh,
Mm.
that's one that I never get through.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And have your kids read this?
I know my daughter has. Uh, I don't know that my son has actually got through it. He's like me at that age, in his late teens and early 20s, not big into books, even though he's in college. I'm saying
Yeah.
he's not a big fan. A couple of my other kids have read it. I think it's probably
Mhm.
50-50 right now.
Okay, okay. And I mean, but you're open to them reading it because I mean, I know that they've partially lived through this, but theoretically there was a lot that they were not privy to. And, again, they're, you know, potentially seeing dad in a different light as a result of this.
Well, surprisingly, not much of a different light. I've been pretty open and honest with my career in drinking and drugs, because uh, when you raise kids, uh, I have the benefit of knowing who I was and why I was and what my thinking was, and obviously what some of the consequences can be. But when you're raising kids through that age where they're becoming curious about alcohol, I used it as a tool to be honest. Hey,
Mhm.
you want to know what alcohol can do to you? Sit down and I'll tell you. And so my wife Laura and I have had a lot of stories that have maybe scared the kids a little bit, maybe uh, clarified some things, hopefully made them feel more educated on it, because most kids, or a lot of kids anyway, when they get to be high school age, they're curious about. They see people drinking. Why
Yeah.
wouldn't they be curious about what it could do to them or for them? And so we had real conversations, and it was great. I feel like what a blessing to have studied why I drank and understand a little bit about that, and be
Mhm.
able to share it openly with them, because it's a great tool. And a lot of parents don't have that uh, for whatever reason. Maybe kids don't want to look at a parent who's drinking and then take advice about drinking from that same parent.
Right.
So we're in a unique position in this house, and I took advantage of it to try and educate my kids.
Okay. Yeah. And what I thought was interesting also was, you talk about if you go through the songs you wrote post cracked rear view, they're this window on a very damaged soul at the time. And which I thought was interesting. It's like, oh yeah, well, when you put it in a kind of hindsight perspective and you start, going through these songs like, Only Lonely and such, and Tootsie from Fairweather Johnson, were you aware of what these songs were revealing about you at the time?
No, as I write songs in the present, and I think looking back, songwriting is pretty spontaneous. You're feeling something and you're getting it out on paper or in melody, and I typically don't question the root or the origins of the feeling.
Mhm.
I'm trying to come up with some rhymes and something that's clear and maybe catchy, and so I've never questioned a pattern, if you will, like the pattern I discovered in hindsight about after cracked review songwriting. I never bothered looking back until I wanted to communicate something to my audience
Mhm.
and try and help them to understand what a mind, especially that's looking for answers and relief from the pain of life. That's what I was looking for, and I used alcohol. And but as I started looking back, writing the book, I saw, yeah, why was loneliness and pain and I don't know, carnage such a big theme for me? Not even my own, but often even co-opting other people's stories. I liked
Mm.
writing about that, the sorrow and the pain. It was powerful to me. And so while I was writing those songs in the present, it seemed I got that power. Ooh, I like how this sounds. I like the pain. I didn't know it was something more morose over time,
Mhm.
that I wasn't writing any happy songs. All of my
Mm.
songs were either my own painful experiences or someone else's that I was, borrowing for a song.
Yeah.
And yeah, my tears fall down for you, my heart beats for you, only lonely on the inside.
Yeah.
Keep the sharp objects away from this guy, because he seems to be on the edge of something very
Right.
dark. But it's funny, we get as songwriters in a band, everyone eventually gets in a lane. And with Darius and Mark and Dean and I, we all had sort of this lane that had developed over time, where Darius brought in certain styles of songs, Mark brought in certain styles, Dean himself too, and mine was the mid tempo to the slow sad ballad.
Um, and I mean, if it were me though, going forward, I would constantly be over analyzing everything I wrote coming up. Like, oh, all right, what is this song telling about me? Once I realized that that kind of truth serum was happening, lyrically speaking. Have you slipped into that, or has it been like, no, I'm fine, just letting the muse speak through me, and I'll go with it.
I think I've been naive at times, and I think maybe songwriters, in a general sense, can be naive, at least when they're in their early songwriting. You're just purging something and onto paper and notes. Uh, I don't think there's a lot of thought at the beginning of what someone is going to think of this if they read it.
Mm,
Now, something does change with Hootie and the Blowfish by the mid to late 90s, is that we've had this thing called hit singles and
yeah.
millions of records sold. So you're feeling this pressure to replicate something that could do that again, because if you've sold millions of records, you want to keep selling millions of records, right? It feels damn good. And you know who else does is your record company who's funding the whole project. So they're pressuring you, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, to recreate that thing that was very spontaneous and naive and personal. Yet you've got the whole idea of people liking it hanging over your head for the first time. So how do we recreate Let Her Cry? How do we recreate Hold My Hand or Only Want to Be With You, fill in the blank? So
Hmm.
you only get one shot at that sort of naive, blissful, I just write because I love to write. We don't have a ton of fans. We don't have a record company. We have no promises, no guarantees.
Hmm.
We write because it's our nature. And then that's gone. Once you, and it doesn't mean you can't make great music going forward. certain bands recreate themselves and they say, we don't want to do that again. And we're going to discover something new or a new sound or a new way of thinking. And that was never us legitimately or authentically. We liked and we're okay with the way we sounded and who we were as a band. So we weren't like U2, for example, like, we're going to create the next new sound or a
Mm.
new sort of dynamic visually. That never felt right. So we were stuck with being who we were, and we still are. No
Yeah,
regrets.
right. Um, and then, like, one of the bands that I work with is Huey Lewis and the News, and we talked about them last time we met. Um, and Huey, he was the first person who ever illuminated me to the idea where he said success is what breaks up more bands than anything else. And his whole thing was, when you're kind of like you were just saying, when you're in that uphill climb, you're this band of brothers against the world, and there isn't the pressure of the expectations. It's when you reach the highest highs that things really become problematic. And as someone, again, who's detailed all of that in this book, what might your advice be to up and coming bands about, how to survive that?
Uh, you know, it, we were advised to look out for three main things that uh, tend to break up a band, which were in no particular order: women, drugs, and money. And a friend of ours who'd been in the business much longer than we had seen some of this. And before that, there's not much advice about women, drugs, and money. It's pretty much if you get together with guys to make music that you like,
Yeah.
enjoy that blissful period, work hard, grow your fan base if possible, save your money or invest it back in the music. Don't try and get rich. There's some basic things that barely have to be explained, but
Mhm.
it is not until you face any of these woes that you're like stuck trying to figure them out. Like, oh my god, or maybe they're so subtle you don't know that they're in the way. We got our first few paychecks after Cracker Review started selling. I didn't think it was going to hamper who we were or pull us apart. And I don't even know that it did, other than we all had enough money not to have to live in apartments together. We bought
Yeah.
houses to live separately. So there's money, maybe as an example, pulling us apart in some little way. We could never afford that stuff. And uh, so the women part, I don't know. I mean, we've had a lot of that too. We've a band of four guys like us made a commitment early on to say, it's the Four Musketeers. The band always comes first. You might have to skip a wedding. You might have to miss a funeral. You might be out of town and you can't afford to fly somewhere to do
Mhm.
something. And we always put the music first. We booked as many gigs as we could and we rehearsed on the other nights. So anything that got in the way of that, which could be drugs or drug abuse or women, a significant other, if you will,
Yeah.
certainly was frowned upon, or you could it could get you in trouble. I guess we had all sorts of stuff as young men who didn't know anything about anything. Jealousy, envy, denial. With
Yeah.
women in our lives. It's silly in hindsight, but the advice for bands that are arrive at that crossroads where women, drugs, or money might be a problem for them. There's no study guide ahead of time, unfortunately. You got to get
Yeah.
in there and you face it when you arrive.
Right. And one theme, especially in the later part of the book, is you trying to disconnect yourself from the quote rock star persona. Um, and I got to go to the homegrown shows in 2017 in Charleston. Because I also work with Cowboy Mouth, who opened one of those. And I remember being backstage before the show, and you pull up on a bicycle, like the least rock star move there could be. And I'm wondering how much of that was like, oh, this is kind of fun and convenient way to get to the show, and how much of it was, I am so not going to be the rock star guy.
I don't know how much it was my true nature wanting to be different when people thought I was a certain thing or need to fit into a certain role. I always wanted to be a slightly different version of that. That gave me some sense of yeah, I'm just unique. Look at me standing out and being different. But I don't know if it's that or the sort of 12-step model, the program that I used to arrest my drinking. That started working on me over time, and it runs a little bit counter to rock and roll and being in the spotlight and having a certain persona and being I don't know, elusive, untouchable. Um, so the steps are a little bit more based in humility or just being willing to be part of a community, not needing to either be leading it as the king or down
Mhm.
at the bottom a peasant and being walked upon. Kind of getting in the middle, we call it being right sized. So over time, as I was trying to put these spiritual principles to work in my life, they kept rubbing up against that rock star guy who needed a limo to arrive at a gig. And so
Mm.
over time, I was enacting a lot of things that probably looked like, what? That's the drummer? Like,
Yeah.
losing my hair, you know, with a quick uh,
Yeah.
razor, deciding that that didn't need to be part of the new me. I had a buddy help me with it. It wasn't even my idea, but it ran towards the idea of anonymity and just fitting in and not needing to have the attention because I was very much loving the attention I always got, even when it
Mhm.
annoyed me and it was too much. The long blonde hair from the 90s, it made you recognize what I'd accomplished and who I thought I was and needed to be. And when someone suggested, based on these principles again, that maybe you shave your head as a way of letting go of the past, uh, he was right.
Mm.
I needed to just continue to let go of some old ideas and the old needs.
Okay.
Needed to be given some attention, needed to have the approval of others, needing to feel a little bit above. These things were being challenged, and so the hair was the one of the first things to go. He said, "We're
Was
going to
it
shave that."
was it a relief, or was it, weird at first, or
A both. You're correct. A weird relief.
okay.
it was. It was me taking the risk of trying something new that I had a small intuition might be a weird and good thing, and it
Mhm.
was. I mean, I have a picture of me walking out on the streets of West Jefferson, North Carolina, this small mountain town where I got my head shaved because that's where we were. And I'm just like looking up into the sun, feeling that. And it was
Mm.
just great. It was like there was something so relieving. It was almost like letting go of this unnecessary cape that I wore to tell people who I thought I was. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and so it was a relief. I was I guess, yeah, it was a little bit of a surrender,
Mhm,
uh,
mhm.
and it was a good one. I never went back to having the long hair, and there's little things along the way that I enacted. So fast forward to me arriving on a bicycle, that very much falls in line with me trying to be a little different. There's a saying that I adapted that I'd heard years after I got clean. It said, "The richest man is not the one who needs the most, but who has the most, but that needs the least." So
Mhm.
I took it as, the less things I need that I tell myself I've got to have that, or I need that to be seen in a certain way, the less I need it, the richer I'll be,
Mhm.
and in spirit.
Yeah.
And so losing my hair, not needing a fancy sports car, which is something I did need before in life at a time when my ego was stronger, um, was just another one of those things that I put out to, if I don't need it, I'm going to be richer.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And after finishing this book, there are two moments that kind of stuck in my mind, like it, they're almost like movie memories. Like I swear, like I can visualize them happening. The first is the scene, for lack of a better term, where you're at a wedding and your future wife is basically letting you have it for because she's concerned about your health and that you're just going to kill yourself throughout all of this.
Yeah.
Um, and I won't go into the names involved. It's intense in what she's saying to you, and it's weird because of all the people involved. It's just this surreal scene of the location and everything. And then the other one is the moment when you and your wife are at a solo performance by Darius and you are in the crowd as everyone sings along to Hold My Hand. And again, to me, those are very movie-esque moments. It's like you can picture them as you read them, but they're different ends of the spectrum. And I would think they would be very intense feelings to conjure up to relive. If it's me, my mind is always going to go toward the negative and bombard me with the worst moment. How are you at handling, okay, this was awful and I'm, moving on for it and I'm better for it. And, also this wonderful moment that you had being in the crowd at one of Darius's shows.
Well, I mean, what I take from it is that sometimes the moment that you think is the worst moment or the worst thing to happen to me turns out to be, in hindsight, something that was necessary and maybe even profoundly a gift. And that time where I'm being sort of given an intervention at this wedding, I'm around all these stars and it's all these big names and we're all boozing it up and just patting each other on the back. And here, moments later, I'm in an intervention that is not your typical intervention for someone who's abusing alcohol, where people around you tell you they're worried about you and that you're terrible at this, or you stink at this, or you failed at this. Usually they're illuminating a lot of your wrongdoings, but this was different. It was just someone who was questioning me and asking me, telling me they didn't need the answers. They wanted me to answer these questions for myself. And that was like, oh, whoa, that's different. You're not, I'm not under the light. So, and it was Laura, who I would marry later. Uh, she didn't need the answers, but she wanted me to answer them for myself. So
Mm.
it was like a profound way of sort of making someone think a little more deeply about their life and their worth. And so, yeah, those moments, I don't know if they are, it didn't feel great, but it was like, it made me think.
Yeah.
So
Oh, good. Good.
I do like something that will make me think, and I don't always put a negative or a positive sign on that. It's profound in its own way, and then same with the second moment you mentioned. With finding myself uh, willing to go out in front in the lawn section. Again, thank goodness I had no hair because no one knew me from the man on the moon, and I had a ball cap on. I was a little incognito on purpose, but to feel for the first time what it would be like watching Darius sing "Hold My Hand," a song I had written in the late '80s, uh, with his country band in front of an amphitheater full of people. I wanted to experience that. I actually feel like I needed to release something and to get rid of, uh, I don't know, some hang up or some illusion, or I don't know, not sure what it was exactly, but I wanted to be out there. I wanted to
Hmm.
feel that. I didn't know how it was going to feel. And I'm glad that it was a feeling of relief and celebration. I think that's how I describe it in the book.
Yeah.
I wasn't particularly hung up. I wasn't ever really hung up that Darius had moved on and made a solo record and did an amazing thing with it and got fame and notoriety. I, he never quit the band. He always
Right.
lifted up the name Hootie the Blowfish in interviews. I never was particularly like feeling like he was uh, dissing us in any way. So to go out there pretty early in that career, he was an opening act for another big country act, but he had the whole full audience out there. The lawn was packed, and I knew he was going to play "Hold My Hand" because it was on the set list. It was pretty cool to see how that spectacle looked, because I knew I was part of it too. It wasn't just Darius singing a Hootie song. It was
Yeah.
a song I'd scripted, and something I'd been part of for many, many years before that. So that was a full positive
Yeah.
um, for me.
And getting back to the cowboy mouth, so Fred LeBlanc says he still says you're the hardest hitting drummer he has ever encountered. Um, Fred will do an impression of you where he said it's like you slam, and he said it's like the ground shakes. You know, he said Sony steps up and it's like Goong, he said, it's like, hold my fucking hand. Just everything is just, rumbling. And I'm wondering, though, you're such a laid back guy. Where does that massive force come from?
Well, I think I didn't really learn to drum. I was sort of born a drummer. And so the passion I put in to the noises that have been in my head since being a child, before drum lessons helped to organize, the noises uh, in my head. I think there's just so deep and ingrained in me when I get to actually make them. They're not just the rhythms that I still hear going on, drum beats on the dashboard, on the steering wheel with my own teeth, dental drumming.
Yeah.
It's not that. When I'm actually making the noises with my arms and feet, it's just deep for me. And I don't play particularly fast. I don't play particularly intricately, but I'm going to make you know where the beats are. And that's funny for Fred, who is a drummer who I put in high on my list of drummers I admire for a variety of reasons. One of them is he puts so much passion as well into his playing that to hear him compliment me is meaningful, because he's one of my tops. I've been watching him since the early '90s, and he's never casually hit a drum himself. He's
No.
never casually sung a lyric. He demands, he incites, it's insane and spiritual also. So thanks, Fred.
Yeah, yeah. No, and again, he does not hit lightly either. So for him to say that you give things a pounding is saying something. Um, and one thing I thought was I'm always curious when a band covers a song, their interpretation. And this one, in this tour that you guys did this summer, in the midst of Only Want to Be With You, you segued into the Kool and the Gang song, Get Down on It. Uh, Original drummer on that was George Brown, this great funky beat. And I'm wondering, were there things you learned or noticed about the song when you started playing it that maybe you didn't notice as a casual listener?
When we started playing that, and I don't know when it was, and I don't know why it was, not all of our songs are sort of contrived. That one popped up, I don't even know. And when we start playing something live and you haven't had a chance to study, like a cover, for instance, and you haven't had a chance to study, you're interpreting it. And it wasn't for years that I went back and actually listened to their version. It came up on the radio after we'd been playing it on tour for a while. I was like, oh my gosh, this is a different song altogether. I'm up there maiming this thing, and
Oh,
there's carcasses being drug off. We try and give it some style, and it feels right. And there's nothing like a sort of disco maybe era track to make people's butts get in gear. But I hadn't given it much thought when I started playing it, and therefore when I went back to listen to it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I may be too far gone to even try and go back and honor something that he's created, because it felt vastly different, especially at this point of the set that we put it, which is the end. You were
yeah.
so jacked up. You were so like, ready to explode.
Yeah.
Um, there are sweeter versions, and I think their version is sweeter and groovier than ours. Certainly, uh, we're beating the hell out of this thing by the time we get around to it.
Yeah, okay. I can see that. I can see that. It still had people moving, though. It still achieved the same goal. You could see it in everyone in the audience.
You're right about that. There's nobody that's, unless you have some offense towards that style of music, you're going to start dancing when you hear it. It's similar in that way to Wagon Wheel, which is divisive somehow. You either maybe love it or you pan it as if it's offending you because it's got so popular and oversaturated that people have these big opinions against it. But I'll tell you, whether you love it or hate it, when you play that song in front of 15 or 20,000 people, the people start moving that were half asleep and they hear that and they're like they've just been plugged into a wall. Ushers that were sitting there uninterested for an hour and a half are suddenly like boogieing. People are jumping off their crutches and wheelchairs. It just does something and cool. And that song, "Get Down on It," has that same effect. I don't care what you were doing. As soon as you hear that song go, you're up.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, as far as cool grooves go, I've always loved the fact that in the midst of Old Man and Me, you guys break it down where it's just the drum and bass for like a bar or two. And I'm wondering how that came about because it's just got this great feel to it with you and Dean going at it at that point.
The first time we ever recorded that was up at Reflections Studio in Charlotte, and Mark Williams was probably the producer there with assistance from Don Dixon arranging some stuff for us. But we had a few tricks of production that we were getting better at. We had been writing and performing for probably a couple years when that song came onto the scene and Darius brought it in. But we knew that there were moments you could create in an arrangement, and one of those moments is let's break it down to just bass and drums, And I don't remember how we came up with that idea, or if it might have even come across naturally. Maybe Mark sat out for that portion and allowed the lead bassist and lead drummer to have a moment. uh, I don't remember how it came, but it worked. It worked in the first recording on our EP called Coochie Pop from '93, and then we didn't record that again until the Fairweather Johnson. It would have been a nice song for Cracked Rear View. It got bypassed. I don't know why. I think we wanted to put a couple newer songs on there, but that period between '93 and '96 had a lot of good music that had been tested in front of audiences, and we
Mm-hmm.
knew they worked. Old Man and Me was one of those that we knew, people started moving when they heard it, even if they hadn't known it before. So in hindsight, you do the best you can choosing songs for a project and, working radio the best you can. And, hindsight, yeah, I do a couple things maybe differently, but uh, here I am. I still get to do an interview with
Yeah.
a great interviewer in 2025, so something went right.
Right. Yeah, and yeah, obviously, and and again, it was great to see you guys out there this summer and just the joy of it all that everyone had in experiencing all of that again. Um, and it's fascinating because I've now this past year I worked with Sister Hazel, and I've also done around their 30th anniversary. In addition to interviewing you guys, interviewed Edwin McCain, and besides the love of the music and the support of each other, it is interesting that you guys have all, or some of you have experienced that addiction and come out the other side. Um, what would you say is the common denominator that has enabled you and Edwin and can block to, find life after addiction?
Well, I mean, first, some of us are lucky enough before a drug or a drink kills us to get just sick and tired enough that we seek out an answer, from someone else or a group. And that's a real blessing. Again, one of those things that might seem like the worst damn day of your life when you realize you're defeated, but in hindsight, you say it was the best day of my life because I came to a real decision and got out of denial. So, you know, finding that before you die is sort of the key, and a bunch of us have, and then there's bumpy rides that go along with it. There's guys, and I'm one of them that tries it, but then they get impatient or think they're missing the party and they go back to it, or they got them some stuff that they're struggling with in their mentality that causes them to go back and reach for a drink. There's plenty of that out there, but regardless of that, there's a kinship that we get out on the road when we're together to say, not only are we grateful just to be musicians who can still pay rent because we have fans, but those of us that have survived addiction have an extra, I think, degree of that gratitude that says, "Oh my gosh, I'm alive, and I might not be right now if I hadn't have asked for help, and maybe not just once, but a bunch of times."
Mhm.
Because it's a joyful life. There's a lonely side too. The guys that don't party anymore, it's a little different life. It's a little different view for us because we can't do certain things, and though we're grateful that we're not doing them, a lot of people around us in a tour, at a rock and roll show, there's people turning it up to the next level and having a bunch of fun if they can control things in a mannerly way. But so there's, a little bit of give and take with the lifestyle, but in hindsight, I wouldn't be alive if I would have kept that up. So sure is nice to be here on the right side of the ground.
Yeah, yeah. And then finally, I know you've done a lot of interviews about the book, and I'm wondering though, is there anything that we haven't covered or that no one has covered that you want to talk about? It's like, well, people keep asking me the same questions about this, that, and the other, but for once, I'd like to talk about X.
Mm. I don't think that there's anything encompassed in the book. I always like to go back and reiterate. I guess I found myself because I've heard different versions of this, uh, and even found myself trying to remember the exact timeline. But there's a lot of people that will try and go back before our 2019 tour when no one was sure if we were getting back together or what caused us to take a dormancy. It we decided to take a dormancy for several reasons, but neither of them are that Darius wanted to leave the band because of country music, or Darius quit the band, or Darius said, "I'm putting the band aside so I can focus on country." That isn't one of the reasons, nor is one of the reasons that I started dating Laura, who was married to Mark previously. Neither of those are reasons why we decided to do what we did in 2008, which is to take an undetermined sort of
Hiatus.
dormancy hiatus. Yeah. And so sometimes that people are trying to come up with theories on all that. But no, we did it because we were burnt out. We needed it, and we needed to re-find ourselves. I don't think anybody knew where it would end up. And years later, it didn't matter. By the time 2019 rolled around, we had our first big sort of reunion tour. No one cared, like who's
Hmm.
married to who, or whose kids are whose, or whether Darius was a country star or not. Not, we were trying to get in front of our Hootie fans, and they had gathered in droves to celebrate our music, and that was really even talked about. And I'll say one thing that I didn't get to say in the book, which is thanks to all the fans who in 2024 came out again in droves to support the Summer Camp with Trucks tour, which we got to have Edwin McCain and Collective Soul on. That was
Hmm.
a brilliant way to do almost 50 shows, and we got to play amphitheaters again, which is just astounding to think that we ever got to go back to that high realm of touring. It's not a lot of bands can cruise through the amphitheaters of America and put anywhere from 10 to 20,000 people in them. And the fact that we still get to do that is a huge blessing, and it's on our fans. They're the best out there. And so that's something I didn't get to say in that book, because obviously we hadn't got there yet.
Yeah. But no, and the show in Raleigh was absolutely packed, and with everyone knowing every word. So it's it was a special moment. What my wife likes to recount, especially, also, is on the way out, the outro music. Well, the first song was John Denver's "Country Roads," and like the entire crowd was singing along, even to the outro music, as they're filing into the parking lot.
That one also noticed by some of us on stage as you're leaving. First time I heard the audience singing it, I was like, why is the after show walkout music turned up so loud? I realized it wasn't. It was the voices of the fans just singing it as they left. Bye-bye. Maybe we should put that in our set, guys.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, that covers all of my material. If there's anything else you want to add, great. If not, I've already kept you for an hour at least.
Well, I appreciate the great questions and the chance to talk about some of that stuff. And no, there's nothing else I would add to it. Thanks for getting through my barking dogs and the guy out in the lawn knocking on the door.
No problem. Life happens.
Yeah.